anyways, okay, we're live according to this button. Just I want to say a minor announcement, or maybe not that minor. Today I tagged an alpha release on the simple auth module because I finished all the testing that I wanted to have in place. It's functional testing on the OAuth, different OAuth flows that we want to support, which is all of them. In the end, I couldn't just restrain myself, and I wrote support for all of them. But I did it in a way where it can be separated, and they are actually in two different modules. It's a project with a submodule, and third-party authentication is in a separate module because I think it makes sense and reuses the whole underlying basic stuff and just adds. I made plugins for the grants. So if you want to override them to have an auth server that is not exactly standard but close to it, things like, for instance, supporting passing the authentication token as a query string parameter, which is supported by the standard, but I kind of refused to implement that because of the security implications that it has, like especially with the logging requests. It's kind of the universal logging key is the request URL. Even if you can log the HTTP headers as well, it's kind of better etiquette not to log the authorization header. So, anyways, things like that someone may want to override if you have it in a plugin style. Even if we know that there won't be any more plugin instances, there will be only 5 for all of the grants. I think that it made sense. Not sure if we want to talk at some point to do a core readiness review on this code, but I think it's going to be way simpler than what you've been doing.
Right. So you broke up for just 1 second there. I think you were saying something like whether the time is right to do a full review of the version 2 branch of the simple auth module, right?
Right. Yes.
For inclusion considerations.
Yes. So a review of that sort, I'm assuming that's going to be way simpler than the one that you have been doing for JSON API, because the module is way simpler.
Yep. Yeah, that's maybe a good segue into the thing that I think Ted also wanted to bring up, but also myself, which is and also the simple auth version 2 module. So the one where you're building upon that standard PHP library. Either one of them should be added to 888.3 as an experimental module. Like this one, the version 2 branch of the simple auth module, I don't see any particular reason why it could not continue in Drupal core as an experimental module, because there is nobody using it yet. It is building upon that external library, so a lot of the subtleties are already taken care of. It is just, between big air quotes, the Drupal integration, and so that seems maybe like a good thing that could be, or a good candidate for something that needs to be matured in core, because then it gets much more exposure. But I wonder what your thoughts are on both of them, JSON API and OAuth.
So for OAuth, I think it's I don't know. I don't want to say it's the perfect use case for this experimental tool, but I think that it's a good match just because of all the reasons that you said, and because there are some things that are a little bit opinionated on how they they were done because of Drupalisms. And during that process of inclusion and that maturity process that happens when it's included as experimental, those things can get to the perfect spot. And I'm thinking about like, remember the conversation we had about having a virtual user when logging something that doesn't tie to user credentials.
Yep.
So that ended up not working because all of the Drupal assumptions that you can save a reference to the currently logged in user, and for a virtual user. So for instance, when you create a node, it's going to save the reference to the author based on the currently logged in user.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that if we want to rectify that, and we probably should, it's something that can only happen in Drupal core anyway, and that being in module will bring much more exposure, and then gather feedback will result in feedback from more people who know how all these systems work and what the most appropriate way is to make it all work together. So
exactly. So yeah. those are the reasons, because I think it's going to be like, it's going to stand out as a weird solution. So why do I need to assign a default user reference to a client entity, a client being the app, if I'm saying that this is used without a user, right? And that kind of forces this conversation about having fully functioning virtual users, but at the same time you want to have an author on stuff, right? So some conversation needs to happen, and of course that didn't happen. It happened between me and me, which is I agree with me all the time. So.
I love the way you explained that. So it sounds like you're at least mostly +1 for moving the OAuth version 2, so OAuth 2 module branch 2.0 into corazon experimental module, right?
Yeah.
You're +1 for that.
Yeah.
And Ted, do you have thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing would be that sort of how we publicize it, because it seems like it's the first experimental module that is explicitly a security-related module. And so do people really understand what experimental is? And especially when we're saying this is an experimental module that deals with sort of the most basic security mechanism on the site, which I don't think is bad, but it's something we should keep in mind when we write blog posts about it, or just generally publicize it.
I see what you're saying. In that regard, I would say that the security implications are off the module, in the sense that the security concerns about OAuth 2, like having traffic with tokens that travel without SSL, that's a concern. But that's something that we cannot do anything about it, right? Yeah. From the Drupal perspective, and that's something that's known because OAuth 2 has been out there for a while. The other kind of implications, as in what if we screw and we allow people to log in with to do permission escalation or things like that. I'm not super worried, because there are minimal points where that could happen, because this integrates with something that's existing already, which is the authentication provider system. So if there was a security concern, it was there all along.
Yeah, and we shouldn't have to, we shouldn't have to worry, because it's experimental. So we should be able to do this. Yeah.
That was my first thought. When you enable an experimental module, you have to acknowledge explicitly in the UI that yes, you are aware that this is an experimental module, and yes, there may be security problems, and so on and so on. So I think that's already a fair caveat. But also, beyond the point of making the user aware of that, the concrete security implications of, for example, not using HTTPS, that is also a problem when you use cookie authentication without HTTPS. It's also the case when you use basic auth. So in no way are we worse there than today.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's worth calling out, but it's not worse in any case.
I would say that it's better because the tokens will live for something like 10, 30 seconds, and you have to catch that token and be able already to have an attack with that token before it expires, which doesn't happen with basic auth, because you have the username and password, and you can generate as many tokens as you want, or even So so that's I want to leave it at that.
That sounds sane.
Because there are other things that I assumed in the module, like things that you can do using the UI. You should be able to do using the auth module, but those assumptions will I guess will be reviewed during code review, I guess. So I don't want to get into that.
So do you want me to do a review before proposing it as a core module, or do we think it's better to just propose it as a core module, because it's not going to gain a substantial number of users, presumably, before we propose it as an experimental core module? So maybe it's better to just propose what you have right now, which is an alpha 1 release of the 2.0 branch, 2.x branch, and what do you think? Is that what you want to do, or do you want to give it some more time? Because let's not forget that by the end of January, 8.3 will be feature frozen. So if we think this is something worthwhile to get into 8.3, then this is probably the time to start proposing it.
This is the time. It makes sense. I don't really mind if we do a kind of hand-to-hand review before proposing it or after, assuming that everything is subject to change, right?
That's the case anyway.
I'm open to it. I know that Matt Grill, for instance, he was interested on trying this out. Maybe this could be a good opportunity to, for one part review the code, for the other part review the sanity of the user experience or the feature set that's implemented and how it's implemented. And then I think that the missing part would be the documentation, but luckily I don't think that we need much documentation in this case, right?
I don't think so, no, because, well, again, precedents, the existing modules, basic auth and cookie auth, they don't have particular documentation either. And OAuth 2 is a well-documented specification. And so we should be able to just point to a tutorial and enough, I think. I don't expect like maybe 1 or 2 pages of documentation. I'd be happy to write that if that's what is blocking this from getting committed into 8.3 as an experimental module. But yeah, I don't think that's going to be an issue.
So yeah, I don't see many road blockers in there.
Awesome. So I just pinged Matt, and he said he will check it out today. So that's encouraging already.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so I would say let's aim to create an issue by early next week or so for Drupal core to propose to add to Drupal core, so that we still have an issue out there in the core queue before the holiday season, which is by definition going to be a time when we're going to have a hard time finding reviewers. So if it's already in there and we can get that process started, then hopefully still get it done.
Cool. Can I ask some of you to write that? Because I'm
because I'd be happy to, but you're the author, right? So, but I'm happy to write it and say something along the lines of Matteo has worked on the previous version. Now he has refactored it to use the standard PHP library thing, getting off the island, blah, blah, blah. It should be much more reliable. It's comprehensive. It is not yet broadly used, but because it's using that library, it should actually be much more stable, more bug-free. It is just integrating that library with Drupal concepts, and that's the area that we'll need to improve probably. And then mention, for example, your virtual user problem or challenge that we can improve upon in the coming months and in the next release and so on.
Yeah.
If that sounds good, I'm happy to do it for you.
That makes a lot of sense to me. The only thing that I would add is a link to the video series, because that is a very good way to, if you're willing to spend, I don't know, the total maybe half an hour. So if you're willing to spend that, it kind of gives you a complete rundown of all the features and how they are implemented. So it kind of it can make sense, I guess.
Yes, yes. And before I'll post the issue, I'll let you check it and see whether you have anything you'd like to add or. So I'll take that on then. So
okay, thank you.
Does that sound like a good thing for us to? Well, last week we didn't even have this on the table, but now it seems like it's totally doable to add this as an experimental module to 8.3. So are we feeling yay, or are we feeling a bit hesitant?
I'm feeling yay. I mean, when I did the functional testing, it kind of gave me like a better understanding of the user pain that may exist. I also recorded the video, so I had to use it, and I messed it at sometimes because I had to reinstall the module, etc. So I saw that if you have a different client ID, that fails with a comprehensive error, because that's all handled by the library, and that's great, right? So those facts, I know I'm feeling confident on the technical part, maybe less confident on the way that it's translated to Drupalisms. Like maybe something that's now considered a content entity needs to be config entity, or things like that, right?
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, that's not too big of a deal. There's going to be other people who have other thoughts than I do, than you do. So we'll find a way to consult.
Right. Yeah. Leverage the community.
Yep.
But yeah, I feel good about it mostly.
All right. Well, awesome.
And the best thing was to see how using clients that knew nothing about the Drupal library, the Drupal module or the library, just integrated seamlessly. No problems. You just pass in an authorization, an ID, a key, and it gets you a token and authorizes the request for you. And it works with Drupal. So awesome. That gave me kind of the vote of confidence. That's something that didn't happen for the version 1 of the module. So
that sounds really encouraging then. Yeah, awesome. So I think we covered everything in OAuth 2. Do we want to move on to JSON API and whether you think that is ready to move into or propose as an experimental module?
Yeah. For JSON API, I think that there are several points where your review, and thank you for that. I know that I said thank you already, but again,
thanks.
I think that there are several places where there are some integrations with core that may need to improve those areas before we can remove some craft that we have, especially around the exception handling system.
Yep.
Also around, damn, I forgot. Well, there are a couple of those that we have core issues that are related, that are kind of blocking
yes.
this.
But are you saying that those should block the JSON API module from being added as an experimental module? Or are you saying that those are things we should eventually fix? Because quite often, well, it can be quite difficult for a contrib module to get things fixed in core that aren't hard blockers, but soft blockers that allow simplification. And I think maybe it's easier to get people to help out with those blockers in core. Those, well, what are basically infrastructure/architecture issues, if are also in core. So if JSON API is an experimental module. So I personally don't think any real hard blocker for, so the review that I did, I opened about 10 issues for them. Several are super minor. A few are normal, if you will, and a few are major, I would say. But I think many of them, if not all of them, can actually be fixed while it is in core. I don't think even that any of them would cause a significant BC break, except for maybe one. So that's what I'm asking, I guess.
UUID one?
UUID one, and I guess maybe the format name, I was wondering. So it's JSON API is the name of the module, is the name of the spec, but then it's API_JSON in the format query string. And that's a super silly, tiny thing. But if that changes, it of course has a big impact. But I guess even that we can even keep BC for that by having an alias format that just directs to the same thing. So even that wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, I'm not super worried about that one. If that's the one that's gonna break BC, then we can just. It's a matter of preference. I just happen to prefer have.
Yeah, I don't care as long as it's documented and justified.
Right. Yeah. So if that is the case, because I was thinking that having those unresolved issues could generate some pushback for the inclusion of it as an experimental module.
We should, maybe Ted can explain how many follow-up issues there are for the outside-in module, which is also experimental. Like, it's totally fine to have follow-up issues, and in fact, it's encouraged because it shows what the next steps are that you plan to do. The point of experimental modules is that you don't have something perfect from the start.
Yeah, there were like 40, or there are 40, some of them done, but yeah, a lot of them were around, well, obviously outside in more around like UI ideas, but a lot of JavaScript refactoring is still going on. So yeah, there's definitely a lot.
Yeah,
it was a work in progress.
Yep. But perhaps the key difference is, of course, that outside in is not something that offers an API, or if so, a very, very narrow one. Whereas JSON API is all about the API.
Yeah.
So every change, of course, affects other code. Whereas this is just under the hood changes, effectively, that change how the slightly, or fixes bugs in there, or makes it more universally applicable, or whatnot. But so it is different. But that is, like, as far as experimental modules themselves are concerned, it doesn't need to be perfect. Of course, and we don't offer BC also for experimental modules. Of course, that does make things a whole lot harder for clients to start using JSON API in A3 if it's in there, and then we break BC in several major ways. Well, that would, of course, be a pain for them to upgrade along with. But I think, and I think maybe that's the thing we need to assess. The best view on the module, I think I have a pretty decent view on the module. Does it seem that it's going to require backwards compatibility breaks, so changes in URLs and changes in responses and in accepted requests, because those are the things that determine whether there is a BC break or not.
Right.
And as far as I can tell, that is very unlikely, because precisely you are following the JSON API spec.
Yeah. So the only two things that I would want to fix, and that doesn't mean that we cannot file the issue to consider inclusion, because I think that those things can happen like in the before the holidays, maybe, but yeah, are the things that require a most fundamental change, like for instance, assume always UUID, and if not, then use the ID and ditch the configurability on that. So right now you can choose either your API uses IDs or uses UUIDs. So that's something that may cause like big refactors that may be more difficult to get in the context of this is contrib, or in the context of this is a core, even if it's experimental. So that's one, and the other one is the usage of plugins, which I'm still not sure I follow your train of thought in there, but I haven't given the consideration that it deserves yet. So these are the two things that I would be right that make most sense to have fixed.
I agree.
Before putting them in.
But would it help? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we cannot file the issue for inclusion, right? To consider inclusion, including the module.
Yep. Yeah, those are the two issues indeed. Like that is the single most major issue that I think or the biggest concern I have, the one surrounding plugins, the use of plugins. And yeah, the ID field versus UUID field. That is not a super huge concern, but I think it would be great to indeed lock it down to just UUID and automatic fallback to ID, because it reduces the number of use and hence the number of failure modes and so on. So I think that would be, and that one should be easy to introduce, I think, right? It's just that maybe some of the existing consumers can have a hard time, but even then the default is UUID already, so it shouldn't really affect anybody. Yeah,
I'm +1 on that. I mean,
okay. So would it help for you if I filed patches for those two issues, and then you would only have to review it or continue from where I left off?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think that would be great. So to recap, apart from those issues and maybe some stylish review, have the coding standards fixer do its thing and blah, blah, blah. I don't think that there are many things that cannot be fixed in a scenario like the one that you were describing with like the one with outside in, where follow-ups are a natural thing, and the degree of stability is just experimental.
Yep,
I guess.
Exactly. To me, I've looked at the entire module now, and it's not like I've got a lot of experience with JSON API in terms of code that interacts with it, but the code definitely looks very solid, and I don't have major concerns, as I basically described in the issues I find. So your plan of attack and the two major-ish concerns that you have, that all sounds sane to me. Do you have additional thoughts? Because I know that you pinged me about JSON API last week.
Yeah, I don't remember what I pinged you about. No, I mean, I think, though, I guess the one warning I would say is it does seem like once stuff is experimental, it is obviously going to slow down the project compared to contrib. So if any of those major things, I would definitely say try to get them in before, unless there are things that you would say, well, it'd be quicker to get them done before, but I'd rather have more eyes on them. So you'll definitely get more eyes on them.
That's an important distinction. Yep.
Yeah, you'll get more eyes on them, which I guess could be good or bad. And as far as like posting the issue before it's ready, I almost wonder if we might want to draft the issue, but I feel like as soon as we post it to Drupal.org, people are going to want to see the patch. So maybe we could draft it in a Google Doc or something. So rather than posting the issue, then maybe there'd be a whole lot of bike shedding on whether it's a really good idea before people actually see what it would look like experimental. Wait to post the issue till we can actually, and here's the module, and then people can maybe bike shed, but at least on something more solid.
Yeah, same thing.
Yeah, that
as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And especially, you know, if Wim's gonna be helping out with patches, and I think that I may find some availability. So I think that this can happen like fairly quickly, I would say. So yeah, the only extra thing that I think it would be very nice, but this is when this is experimental. It's someone from the other side of the road using the JSON API Drupal module with existing software that uses JSON API. I'm thinking about maybe the Ember.js libraries that use this. There are models that integrate with JSON API and things like that. If we could get a group of people that could kind of test that from that perspective, because I've been getting patches from people saying, hey, if you populate this field in the errors specification, we could get form validation for models in Ember.js because it's in the spec, and so this kind of stuff, which is not like super critical, but it makes the experience way better. Like real people using it from a consumer point of view. This kind of stuff would be very helpful while it is experimental. So we could add like these small features that make a lot of you know, a lot of sense. Like this form validation with server side validation is you know, in a generic way. And yeah, I think those are all the concerns.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable, I think. And it sounds like you also think that those are not, well, those are valid concerns, of course, but they don't need to block JSON API from becoming experimental. And like the thing you just mentioned, form validation error stuff, that actually would benefit from it being experimental because more people would use it. More people would be aware of it. And so we'd get that kind of feedback sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do have other stuff that I have to do, but I will definitely try to do my utmost best to create an OAuth 2 experimental module proposal issue, and I'll let you review it before posting it, of course. Whether we said it would be a good idea to do a review of that module before posting it or not, but the JSON API module seems to have a much bigger scope. And it does have a stable user base, and it integrates with many more points in Drupal than the OAuth 2 module. So I think it should be okay for the OAuth 2 module to be proposed as an experimental module. And then for the JSON API module, I'll work on patches for those two particular issues. And we'll start working on a draft for, again, an experimental module proposal issue. But that one will, of course, be, or will likely be, quite a bit bigger because JSON API is a much bigger thing. Those are a bunch of action items for me, and I'll try to do my best to push them forward. I'll keep you posted.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm very excited that this is actually happening. I applaud you for pushing things forward so far, so fast. Even while just recently having become a father. So thank you very much. And please do spend enough time with your family. That's the most important thing. But still, it's very exciting.
Remember, we work from home. We don't have to commute. So those hours are precious for the Drupal community.
Yes, I totally agree. We have the same deal going on, Ted and I. So.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Those are very kind words.
Well, it's I didn't expect it to be in this state at this point. To be honest, it's really incredible.
Yeah, I think people are going to be psyched to have it as an option for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think many people will see it coming so fast.
I've been using the JSON API spec first in Drupal 7 through the RESTful module, and then in a homegrown solution that we have, and it's been working great for us, and I think that it's a very flexible solution. I'm not sure how it would compare to GraphQL, because it kind of solves the same issues in a different way, maybe a more known way, but less new and exciting.
Well, I think it's kind of classical REST is on one end of the extreme. That's what the REST module does, and then GraphQL is on the other extreme, where it's using a single entry point, a single URL where everything is happening, and so that is very unrestful. And JSON API is square in the middle, I think. Like it's bringing the best of the two together. It's still it just specifies more things so that not every API has to invent its own way of doing things. And so I think there's going to be people wanting all three different interpretations or approaches. So we'll see.
And sometimes it's going to depend on.
It's definitely better. Yeah, exactly. It depends on what the existing tooling and software is that you're building upon and integrating with, and so on and so on. So
cool. Yeah. Well, exciting times, I guess.
Yes, it is. Are there other things we should discuss, or is that all we want to cover?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's fine if we have stuff, which I don't. But if something comes to mind, it's fine that we have stuff for other weeks, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, this was a very good discussion, I think.
Yep, absolutely. If you want to review the discussion, you know that these videos are recorded, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, perfect. Just in case. I mean, if you say something like it's super awful, I could not post it.
It's already live.
Yeah, it's too late already.
You know, like the thing Ted said, and I had to cut out.
Do you know how to scrub the internet? That could be really useful.
Anyways, guys, if you don't have anything else, I should drop.
Okay.
To tell us.
All right. Good to talk.
Bye, everyone.
Yep.
Bye.
Good talk.
Have fun
next week. Bye-bye.